provides high-quality and low-cost healthcare for everyone with family planning counseling, contraceptives, pregnancy testing, fertility and prenatal treatment. At GRPA, there's confidential HIV and STI counseling, testing and treatment, screening for prostate and cervical cancer. GRPA, your #1 sexual and reproductive healthcare provider. 70 Kwamina Street. Telephone 225-3286 or 225-0739.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the GRPA, the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association panel discussion focusing on sexual rights and teenage pregnancy. Now, these are two issues that deeply affect and impact Guyanese and persons worldwide. And tonight we're going to explore these issues a little bit further, talking about the legal components, the social components, and also exploring some of the work that's being done to really promote these issues and also dealing with sensitization and access. With Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association, given our focus on sexual and reproductive health and rights, our umbrella, that's our umbrella focus, sexual rights and teenage pregnancy are very key components of it. And we take an approach where we provide comprehensive gender-sensitive sexuality education, as well as promoting access to services and education needs. The Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association, we work across the country with a variety of partners and stakeholders, including faith-based organizations and also community groups with youth in and out of school, youth, state stakeholders, and among others, including some of our partners who are here tonight from SASOD, so the Society Against Sexual Orientation Discrimination, Managing Director, Joel Simpson, and Ms. Dela Britton, attorney at law, and both of whom are board members at GRPA. I'd like to welcome the both of you, and thank you very much for taking the time out to join us this evening.
Thank you for having us.
Great. So I guess we'll just delve right into the topics that we're going to talk about tonight. And I'd like to start a little bit on sexual rights, Dela. And, you know, sexual rights, it's been around for so many years, but it's now gaining some traction and persons are becoming more and more aware. But still, there's that segment of the population that don't really understand what sexual rights are. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you very much, Renuka. To adopt from Hillary Clinton's Beijing 2000 rights on women, I'd like to say that sexual rights are human rights, first off. We don't really and truly have any express laws with respect to sexual rights in Ghana. It hasn't been enacted in Ghana as a standalone bit of legislation. But we at GRPA are members of we are a member of the IPPF, which is the International Planned Parenthood Federation. And the Planned Parenthood Federation has developed their own Bill of Rights with respect to sexual rights, and it's become a Bible of sorts. It's a document that it's 10 articles long, very concise a very concise document which speaks to non-discriminatory rights, your right to privacy, equality, dignity, and it underpins the fundamental rights mentioned in the Universal Declaration, in our Constitution, and it also, interestingly enough, makes provision for the sexual rights of persons under the age of 18, who are, in the eyes of the law, considered to be children. Mm-hmm. So it's a comprehensive document, and the members, and it provides a framework for its members and indeed Guyana to follow if we are going to really adhere to people's rights and to protect their rights to, as I said before, probably rights to privacy, etc. And so it's that's where we look to in order to see whether we are able to exercise our sexuality, to enjoy our sexuality in a meaningful way.
Great. Thank you. I know you said that we don't have any laws that specifically relate to sexual rights, but it's based on some of our knowledge and the work that we've done. We've promoted that, it's incorporated in some of our acts, especially with specific reference to the Sexual Offences Act.
Yes, ma'am.
So maybe you can talk a little bit
about
that.
the
Yes.
Sexual Offences Act. The Sexual Offences Act was enacted in 2010, and it's a comprehensive document, and it speaks to of course, it redefined what rape is, and it redefined how we approach the court in matters of sexual offenses. It also gives you what is interesting about this act, I find that it gives you an opportunity when an offense has been committed, especially against a child, and that offense might have taken place outside of the borders of Ghana, that perpetrator is still subject to prosecution outside of Ghana for the crime that he might have committed in Ghana, or vice versa. It also, important for us with respect to gender-based violence, it also now makes a husband he can be found guilty of rape of his wife. Before, Joel probably can tell you from his learning that was not the case a few years ago. And so that makes the approach to court and the approach to justice a lot easier for women who might have been sexually abused and all the rest of it at the hands of their husbands or their partners.
Right. And if I could add to that, with specific reference to the Sexual Offences Act, one of the very important changes was we now have a gender-neutral definition of rape, and a very broad, comprehensive definition of rape. So when people think rape is only penile, vaginal contact, and so on, the definition of rape under the Sexual Offences Act covers instruments, using instruments, other forms of penetration or touch, and so on, to cater for developments in the 21st century, which are far beyond what rape was considered to be centuries ago when it was defined as common law. And like Dela is saying, sexual rights are just a branch of human rights. It's just a particular set of human rights which relate to our sexuality. The core of what human rights is about protecting our human dignity. And sexuality is very important to all of us as human beings. It's very important to our personality, it's important to our humanity. So these sexual rights, when we talk about sexual rights, they're not anything foreign, they're not anything alien, they're not anything strange. It's just the application of existing human rights standards, which we all have, but in relation to our sexualities.
Right. Great. And that leads perfectly into my next question. I know, there's been a lot of advocacy work around sexual rights. And in particular, I like the fact that you talked about sexual rights relating to sexuality. And I know SASOD, sexuality is such a broad issue, but in particular reference to the LGBT, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender movement in Guyana, SASOD has been working for over a decade in, doing strong advocacy and highlighting issues, human rights violations and general violations towards the community. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what SASOD has done in the realm of sexual rights from then to now.
How much time we have? Well, quite a bit, we think. A huge part of our human rights focus is around documentation. Documenting violations of discrimination, violations, abuses that people suffer because of their sexual orientation, their gender identity. And more broadly now, we're talking about dealing with these issues in terms of sexuality, gender, and so on, in its broadest possible terms. And so we've even moved from a more lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender specific approach to more of a sexual rights approach in its broadest sense. a lot of the time, people who suffer these violations are minority groups who suffer social stigma. Because we have laws which criminalize same-sex intimacy between consenting adult men in private, laws which criminalize cross-dressing, and because these prejudices which exist in the law also exist socially and culturally, many people aren't able to easily access justice when they suffer violations, people from the LGBT community in particular. So people are often reluctant to report matters to the authorities. When they do, sometimes they're re-victimized, they feel further discrimination at the hands of police, state officials, healthcare workers, whoever they might be reporting to, and so on. So as a human rights organization, we saw our role as being able to, one, document some of those complaints, have a record of it, and then to follow up where people want follow-up, to provide that assistance. In some cases, people don't necessarily want you to follow up because further investigation and dealing with the matter could expose them even more. So sometimes they just want you to know so that you could use it in your advocacy to prevent it from happening to other people. Right. But they don't necessarily want a resolution in and with themselves. And this is one of the misconceptions that I think we had at the recent Universal Periodic Review, where the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Caroline Rodriguez, said in her presentation that the government isn't aware of a lot of these cases that SASOD is talking about in terms of discrimination in the workplace and so on. One, many times the cases weren't necessarily exclusively in the public service. So recourse to the labor officer at the Ministry of Labor is not necessarily the fit. But it's still a human rights violation because a government has a duty to protect, respect, and fulfill human rights. So you're supposed to protect your citizens in ways that prevent human rights violations from occurring in the first place. Not only to put plaster on wounds when they do occur. You're supposed to create that enabling environment where these things can't happen because you have laws which protect people from discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. You enable access to justice so that poor people, socially marginalized people, can be able to access the courts and get justice in a timely manner where it makes sense. Right. A case for discrimination shouldn't be languishing in court for years and years on, right? So those are the things that the government has to do, that the state has to do. And I think there's a misconception on the part of state officials where they think they only have to deal with violations when they occur, as opposed to preventing them from happening in the first place. So over the years, documentation has been a huge part of our focus for that very reason. For the advocacy is to prevent violations from happening again to anybody else, where in some cases we're not able to resolve the matters for the people where they've already occurred.
If I can piggyback on what Joel has said with respect to SASOD, SASOD is responsible for that landmark case with respect to the cross-dressing, and we got a pronouncement out of the Chief Justice, even though it fell short, that cross-dressing is not improper, but it's for only improper purposes it must not be used. But he said that there's no violation to cross-dress and to express yourself as you may see fit. That case is under appeal now.
Yeah, we're appealing that case. So just to share a little bit with your viewers who are not familiar with the background, Guyana is one of the 3 places in the world in this 21st century that has a law which criminalizes cross-dressing. So far that we found in our research. The other 2 places are Nigeria and Malaysia, and they have it under their Sharia law, their Muslim law, their Islamic law. Somehow Guyana ended up with this in our colonial era legislation, and we discovered for the first time in 2006 when there was a single prosecution that this law existed and this law was used. And we did advocacy in relation to this issue. In fact, we were right here at NCN on a radio program on the eve of International Day Against Homophobia in 2006. That was May 16, 2006. Dealing with that issue because the prosecution had just come up just a few days before. In 2009, there was a crackdown over a 48-hour period where more than 7 male to female transgender persons were arrested over a weekend. They suffered a range of human rights violations, particularly sexual rights violations, Renuka, including physical and sexual abuse in detention, illegal detention, and so on. And we decided that, look, this law, once it remains on the books, it's at the whim and fancy of the police to use it. Two, this law facilitates so much other kinds of violations taking place, because if you could just arrest somebody on a Friday night for cross-dressing and maybe not charge them or let them go on Monday and so on, and all of these things could happen to them. They could be raped in detention, physically abused by other inmates, and so on. It gives rise to a whole range of other issues, including transmission and infection of HIV and other STIs and so on. So it affects people's right to health, the right to their bodily integrity. And we thought that too many violations came out of the improper use of an unjust law in the first place. So a year later, in February 2010, with partners, including the University of West Indies Rights Advocacy Project, local human rights attorneys, the transgender community very actively involved, and so on. We filed this case with 4 of the litigants involved. We got a judgment in September 2013. So we can see the first issue is that justice isn't really swift in this country. How many people are going to be willing to go through that? Like Dela was saying, the Chief Justice, we considered a partial victory. The Chief Justice said, cross-dressing is not illegal. On the face of it, it's not illegal, unless it's for an improper purpose.
But he didn't define what an
improper purpose is. That is the problem.
Yes.
So that's one of our main grounds of appeal. The term improper purpose is used in the legislation. It's undefined in the legislation. It doesn't seem to be defined in common law either. So how is anybody to know? One of the things about law is that certainty. You're supposed to be able to read the law and know what is illegal and what's not.
Right.
And if you can't do that, then that law is lacking. So that's one of the main grounds of appeal. We're saying, well, define improper purpose, or at least say in this 2010 crackdown, what were the improper purposes that gave rise to the arrest of these 7+ people?
Right.
And so on. So we're currently before the Court of Appeal with that matter, hoping to bring some clarity to that law.
Okay. I wanted to ask, you mentioned earlier about Minister Burkett stating at the UPR review session, them having no real knowledge about these complaints or, these stories that SASOD talks about. But what were some of the recommendations? And that was a whole long process. And for persons who are not sure, the UPR is the Universal Periodic Review, which comes from the United Nations Human Rights Council. And each country is required to go through it every
4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
4 years. So Guyana just went through it in January 29th.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yes, January 29th. Now, what I would like to know is, what were some of the recommendations coming out of this UPR process based on the report that Guyana submitted?
Right, so Guyana went through its first UPR in 2010, and a lot of the recommendations the government had agreed to hold consultations on, particularly in relation to 3 areas, many of them relating to sexual rights. The issue of corporal punishment, the issue of the criminalization of same-sex intimacy and cross-dressing, and discrimination against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender persons, and also the death penalty.
Yes.
Now, there were some consultations which started around the issue of corporal punishment, but as far as we are aware, they were never concluded. There wasn't a report. SASOD even participated in that, and I know many other NGOs which are part of the Guyana Equality Forum, which we were involved in. And we never got any feedback. We went to oral hearings in 2013, November of 2013. I know SASOD participated and so on. So that select committee didn't complete its work. And then we had, of course, the prorogation. And now we're waiting for a dissolution at some point before we could have regional and general elections. So a lot of the recommendations have been repeated, in essence, calling for the repeal of discriminatory laws. And I think that's a core state responsibility when it comes to human rights, to make sure you have good laws on the books which protect people. If you have bad laws on the books which discriminate against people, you are in a really, really bad place when it comes to human rights, because you have a duty to protect. in human rights, we talk about the tripartite typology to protect, respect, and fulfill human rights. A lot of the other recommendations related to training of the police and so on to deal with matters, because that's one of the sore issues. Depending on which police station you go to and which police officer you go to, some may take your report, some may not take it, some will follow up, some may not follow up. It depends on their own individual prejudices. So that's a very, very sore area where we want to see a lot more work being done. And that's training and sensitizing the police on human rights issues in general, and an appreciation of the human rights issues affecting sexual and gender minorities, so that they could understand that they need to treat everybody equally. That's all they need to do.
Okay.
Right? So those were at the core of a lot of the recommendations, dealing with issues related to bullying as well, homophobic and transphobic bullying in schools, and so on, which is another area where we've been able to document complaints where young people, young lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender youth don't necessarily want to advance those complaints to expose themselves more, especially when they're still in the school system.
Okay, I just wanted to backtrack. Thank you very much. I know we got a nice, good understanding of the UPR system now and where Guyana stands, but I wanted to backtrack a little bit. Earlier we made mention of sexuality and sexuality being a broad issue, leading into the question about, where the work of SASOD. But like we said, sexuality is such a broad issue, and not everybody, when they think sexuality, they automatically zone into maybe a same-sex kind of definition, right? But what I'd like to, before we go into our teenage pregnancy, just to understand the concept of sexuality, maybe you can talk a little bit to that.
Well, you're right, sexuality is a very broad term, and depending on the context in which it's used, it could be used in very broad ways, and it's also very, very specific ways. But in its broadest sense, sexuality refers to your sex, your biological sex. As an umbrella term, it refers to your biological sex, your gender, how you identify based on social prescriptions around what it is to be a man or a woman, or male or female. Your gender identity, how your biological sex and your psychological gender, whether those two match or they don't. So we talk about being cisgender for those of us where our biological sex matches the gender that we portray, and for other people who are not, where they feel it don't match, we talk about them being transgender. So it could oftentimes be an umbrella term for all of that. But in its narrower sense, sexuality is often used to, in a specific sense, I should say, refer to your innate feelings and your desires, and how you express those desires, how you manifest those desires and feelings, your erotic feelings, your erotic being, and so on.
Great. Thank you very much. I just wanted to put that out there because for a lot of persons, it's not a very clear concept. And that's going to lead us into our upcoming discussion on teenage pregnancy. But what I'd like to do is for us to take a short break, and then we will come back. Thank you.
And a healthy nation. The Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association provides high-quality and low-cost healthcare for everyone with family planning counseling, contraceptives, pregnancy testing, fertility, and prenatal treatment. At GRPA, there's confidential HIV and STI counseling, testing, and treatment. Screening for prostate and cervical cancer. GRPA, your #1 sexual and reproductive healthcare provider. 70 Kwamina Street. Telephone 225-3286 or 225-0739.
and welcome back, everyone. Like I said before our short break, what we will be now is delving into teenage pregnancy. Now, teenage pregnancy is a huge problem in Guyana for us here. It's a social problem, it's an economic problem, and it's a health issue for a lot of young persons. At the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association, I know we encounter this a lot given our scope of work, and you'll be surprised at how common it is. And we're now realizing how much more common it is as we're going into communities. It is being highlighted in the news, and every day we're reading articles about 9-year-olds being impregnated because of sexual violence, and their rights being infringed upon. So what we would like to do is talk about how we can, and we'll explore it a little bit and talk about some of the work that GRPA is doing to really tackle this issue. Right? Now, with Guyana, as I said, we have a high rate, but what's a high rate? Among countries, we are number 2. They always say that we're always at the top of the list, but for nothing good, which is unfortunate, and especially in this instance where it really impacts lives and livelihoods. Not only of the young girl who's pregnant, but also the young boy who may have been impregnated her, or families. It's an economic challenge. So, Dela, maybe we can talk about, I'd like for us to talk a little bit about just the whole situation of teenage pregnancy, and with specific focus in terms of legal provisions for young girls who end up pregnant, and also to explore a little bit policies that exist within the education system and the health system to really support these young women.
Unfortunately, as far as I am aware, there are no provisions to protect a teenage pregnant mother or the expectant father. The GRPA has been doing revolutionary work in that regard with respect to the counseling and postnatal care for the mothers. With respect to of course, a teenager is probably still a school-aged person. There is the unfortunate stigma in the community. There's an unfortunate stigma at the schools where she of course has to go in a state of pregnancy, an advanced state of pregnancy. There is no after school or teenage, as far as I'm aware again, there are no teenage educational or vocational training if she chooses to stay home with her child. But of course that counters the Education Act where she then becomes a truant. And so there is a need. I know that they've been heralding a new education bill. I don't believe that too made any provision for the teenage mother. So unfortunately, she is left to her own devices. And with respect to re-entering school post-pregnancy, that is, again, a sensitization that has to happen at the school level, at the governmental level, at the community level, with the churches, etc., so as to allow her to transition from mother to student and vice versa, as she needs to maneuver between those two worlds. So there's a lot more that has to be done. I know that SASOD has developed a framework with respect to teenage pregnancy. I know that they have a projection to 2019, where they are going to there is talk of implementing legislation and guidelines across the region to assist in the health and family education, which should allow a teenage mother and the expectant father to talk about, again, their sexuality, and to talk about the pitfalls of being pregnant in a safe and comfortable environment. That has not been done. As I said, it's on the cards. To answer your question as to whether there's any legislation, again, to combat it, one can't really combat pregnancy. I think it will all have to start with education, and it will have to start with a different mindset as to our sexuality, so that girls feel comfortable talking about it and don't feel pressured into pregnancy. There's another aspect of teenage pregnancy. It's not always of course, you say that a girl under 16 can't give her consent. She can give her consent in certain ways under the Sexual Offences Act. But with respect to teenage pregnancies, they don't always happen with a teenage boy, unfortunately. It could be somebody in the home, an older person in the home, and because of the economic situation at home, the young girl is forced to sleep with the person who is the provider in the home, and it's a whole set of social issues that we have to address before we can even talk about combating teenage pregnancy.
I think the root of the problem, and Dela hit the nail on the head, is education. The teenage pregnancy, the manifestation on the widespread teenage pregnancy we have in Guyana is a manifestation of the lack of comprehensive sexuality education in schools. These, by and large, these teenage girls are not going out there looking for motherhood. They're not going out there looking to become pregnant. So the problem is that we're not teaching our young people about sexuality in school, about sex, about sexuality, about preventing pregnancy, about preventing the transmission of sexual infections, sexually transmitted diseases, and so on. And until we start to recognize that's the root of the problem, we're always going to be dealing with the manifestation of that, which will be teenage pregnancy. It will be the continued spread of sexually transmitted infections like HIV and so on. And we just have to get to the root of the problem, right? And the root of the problem is that we're not educating our young people about sex and sexuality in a comprehensive and proper way so that they could make informed, sensible decisions when it comes to their bodies. The other thing I wanted to touch on is this issue about what happens when a young girl becomes pregnant and she's still in school and she's still of school age. One of our very, very basic human rights is a right to education. And it's also a right, part of what we call the rights of the child, the body of human rights that apply to children. So however we deal with that situation, we have to ensure that that young girl is able to access education. We have to put systems in place so that if she decides to continue with the pregnancy, she's able to go back into the system and get an education. Especially in the 21st century and 21st century Guyana, we live in a very paper-based qualification world. So if because somebody's becomes a mother in her teenage years, she's not able to write CXC, and oftentimes in many of these situations, it takes two to tango. Girls don't get pregnant on their own. But many times, the fathers don't stick around. For whatever reason, oftentimes it's child sexual abuse and so on, right? How is that young mother going to be able to provide for her child if she's unable to complete her education? So, denying a teenage mother the opportunity or her right to full education, it just reinforces an even bigger problem. It pushes that person into poverty because then she can't provide for herself and she can't provide for her child. So what is she supposed to do? Cycle. Yeah, it becomes a vicious cycle. So there are pull factors now to sex work or to get into relationships for economic benefits and so on. And then you could get pregnant again. And you often see that when this is the vicious cycle, when this starts, that people become dependent on their partners for survival when they're unable to take care of their own selves.
Right, great. I just wanted to pick up a little bit on what you talked about the HFLE program and the Health and Family Life Education program. It's come out of a regional framework, out of CARICOM framework. unfortunately, in Guyana, the HFLE program is promoted from an abstinence-only standpoint. Like you said, Joel, we need to really promote comprehensive sexuality education to these young people, because if you're going around, and I'll be very blunt here, if you're going around and telling them don't have sex, don't have sex, don't have sex, they're like, what do you know? Teenagers, they know everything, and you can't tell them not to have sex. They will want to experiment. But if you take it from a comprehensive approach and you're saying, well, if you're going to have sex, this is what is available to you. But these are also the risks that you run. You can't say, well, they're contraceptives and that's it. These are the risks that you run, and you equip them to make informed decisions. You put them in a better place. And what we have found at GRPA in our community-based sessions, a lot of young people, and we see it with our own youth advocacy movement members, our youth members, with more information, they're more inclined to delay initiation. And when we say delay initiation, we mean that they're more oftentimes likely to put off having sex. The most recent BBSS said that the average age of sexual initiation for in-school youth was 14 years, right? Mm-hmm. That's alarming. How many 14-year-olds are out there having sex? That's one of the reasons why we have the second highest rate of teen pregnancies in Guyana. And you mentioned, Dela, the SASOD framework, and that comes out of CARICOM from the Committee on Human and Social Development. Now, they launched it in collaboration with the UNFPA, to combat teen pregnancy, because it's a major issue across the region. But that's not the only framework that Guyana has signed on to. Guyana has signed on to the Santo Domingo Consensus in 2010. They've also signed on to the Mexico Ministerial Declaration. Both of these consensus, along with recommendations from the UNCRC, the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, and other committees, have called upon the government to implement comprehensive sexuality education programs. And a lot of these bigger organizations like UNESCO and our partner organizations, IPPF, all of them have published research on the positive impact of comprehensive sexuality education on the behavior and trends of young people. So it's really important for us to really push for that. And with the work of GRPA, that's one of the primary focal points in our advocacy. It's to lobby, stakeholders, including faith-based organizations and state stakeholders, to really encourage and promote the implementation of comprehensive sexuality education. So I hope that with the SASOD framework coming on board now, within the next couple of years, hopefully by next year, we're very optimistic, that, we will be seeing comprehensive sexuality education being implemented, especially with the recent announcement from the Minister of Education that, and Mr. Lato Sam, the CEO, that they're reframing and they're revising the HFLE curriculum. So that's good news for us, and we really need to just keep pushing there.
Yeah, and organizations like GRPA should certainly be involved in the process of helping to inform that curriculum because of the expertise that we've developed over decades working on these issues. And you're right, the HFLE curriculum is lacking in several areas, and one of the areas is promoting this abstinence-only approach, which doesn't work. Mm-hmm. We have to be realistic with our young people. The facts show, the research shows that young people are having sex. You talk about 14 being the average age of a sexual debut. That's the mean. So that means there are young people having sex as early as 10 and younger, 9-year-olds. We're reading it in the papers every day and so on. That's just the mean. That's just the average.
But whatever programs we develop, even if we piggyback on SASOD, it has to be a rights-based approach. It has to say to the young people that you matter, first of all, and it has to say that you have a right to discuss your sexuality, you have a right to approach your guidance teacher. We had, when I was going to school, I hope I'm not dating myself, you have a right to approach your prefect or anybody to discuss your urges, etc. So you are given an informed view as to how you should deal with that. All of those things help to combat, the high incidence of teenage pregnancy.
Yeah.
Yes, and in 2015, GRPA will be implementing, we've already started, we recently launched our Choices project, which is a youth-focused project, and we're primarily focused on making available comprehensive, gender-sensitive, rights-based, like you said, Neela, rights-based information to young people, young persons, young adults, and adolescents in and out of school, making that information available so that they themselves are equipped to make informed choices. We're also going to be doing work where we're promoting access to services because young people need services, they need commodities, and it's important for them to know where they can get them and how to use them effectively. And we encourage persons to come down to the GRPA clinic because we have a very youth-friendly space. We have our youth program, our clinic, all our staff are trained to work with young people. But, you know, for those persons in the wider community who can't access Georgetown, you know, they have the health centers who they all are adopting youth-friendly approaches and youth-friendly spaces. Yes, dear.
Let me ask you, the young people have to come with their parents?
No.
They
No.
can come on their own?
Yes.
They can come on
It's
their own.
important to note that, and it's a very good question. You know, at GRPA, we have a very open environment to young persons accessing services. So no, they do not need they do not need adult supervision to come in and access services. And actually, a lot of students come in, you know, a lot of young people come in during the course of the day just to find out information. Some of them come under the guise of, you know, having assignments and SBAs, but, you know, we give them the information because it's a necessity. It's a necessity. And like I said, we're doing a lot of advocacy work surrounding comprehensive sexuality education and, you know, having those provisions being made. So, yeah, so we're doing really good work.
Yeah, I think it's also, I think it's also important to underscore the need for this to be structured and to be part of the school curricula, and consistently for every child in school to be able to access and benefit it. Because while we at GRPA might be trying to fill some gaps which exist in the education system with respect to sexuality education, there's only so much we could do. There's only so much coverage we could make.
Right.
A sustained approach is to have, like you describe it, an age-appropriate, gender-sensitive, rights-based curricula. And we need to revise the health and family life education curricula to be able to really provide comprehensive education for young people. And then when that's done, our problem in Guyana is that we don't implement, and we don't implement properly. So we're good at signing declarations, we're good at signing treaties, we're good at passing legislation, but implementation is always lacking. Implementation is always weak. So even with promises to revise the curricula, then we must have teachers who are properly trained to deliver comprehensive sexuality education. And that has to start from the level of the Cyril Potter College of Education, continue to the University of Guyana School of Education, and also retraining at the level of the classroom. So you have to have a very multifaceted approach, because you could have a curricula and then nobody's equipped to deliver it. Teachers are uncomfortable dealing with this subject. Nobody wants to teach it, and we hear that kind of feedback in our work, in our research on these issues. Renuka, you know very well that you don't just throw up the thing and leave it. You have to follow up, you have to implement, and you have to dedicate resources to making sure that it works.
Great. Thank you very much for those thoughts. But I wanted to know, in terms of, you know, we've covered sexual rights, and we've just had really good discussion on teenage pregnancy and some policies and what programs need to be implemented. But I wanted to ask, and both of you, you know, what are your thoughts in terms of the relationship between sexual rights and its impact on teenage pregnancy?
Well, from my perspective, the two are almost inextricably linked, because if your sexual rights are not being respected, protected, fulfilled, if you're not able to access information that you need to ensure you have the highest sustainable standard of health, which is one of your core human rights, if you're not protected from sexual and physical violence, then this is how you become vulnerable to a whole host of things, including teenage pregnancy. And not just teenage pregnancy, but this is one manifestation for particularly young girls. So the two are inextricably linked. We have to work at the country level much harder to ensure that everybody is able to enjoy their human rights and especially enjoy their sexual rights. Young girls too, if we want to see a reduction in teenage pregnancy.
I echo Joel's sentiments 100%. I also want to add that in order for us to move forward as a society and for us to develop as a society, yes, of course, you have to adhere, and those rights are enshrined that must be adhered to, and those protections, followed. But if those sexual rights are respected, we might in turn have a reduction in teenage pregnancy because, of course, you're able to talk about it, you're able to act, you're able to tap into those urges easier. And with that in mind, because there's a reduction, young people will prosper. They will pursue educational goals, etc. And so the society as a whole will improve because of that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. As we know, sexual rights, teenage pregnancy, such an important relationship, and it's important in us promoting, initiatives and education programs that we bear in mind that sexual rights, in order to combat teenage pregnancy, we really do need to bear in mind, like you said, the sexual rights, and that's their it's their human right, their right to education, their right to access to information, so these are all a part of these areas. So I would like to say, it's been very great, and actually the time just flew out a little bit. But any final thoughts in terms of the general areas of work that we've been doing, and especially as it relates to sexual rights and teen pregnancies, in general.
Well, I just would like to encourage the viewing, listening public to reach out to GRPA if they need more information. We're located on Kwamina Street between Main and Carmichael. Call us, come in, visit our website, like our Facebook page to get more information. If you're also interested in the work of SASOD, you can call us on 225-7283. You can also visit our website, www.sasod.org.gy. Or like our Facebook page, come in, feel free to come in as well to get more information on sexual rights, rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people in particular. The old cliche is knowledge is power, and I really do believe that. And the only way that we're going to empower our citizenry is if we educate them, is if we give them the information, is if we give them the knowledge that they need.
Okay. I want to add to what Joel has said with respect to sexual rights and sexuality. It's not a crime. It's nothing to be ashamed of. You should be able to explore it freely. And we have the resources at GRPA. We have the counselors who can probably help you to understand your sexuality, whether you're in the LGBT community, whether you are a teenager. So come in, see us, and use our services.
Yes, and I'd just like to echo the sentiments of both our panelists. At Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association, as I said earlier, we do have an open environment where we offer not only clinical services, but our programmatic approach, where we do a lot of community education, a lot of information sessions, and a lot of our work is done with partners, at the community level, at organizational levels. It's really important for us to continue to explore sexual and reproductive health, and it's such a broad area, and it's a broad area that really touches so many different aspects of our everyday lives. And sexual and reproductive health is ingrained in everyday life, with family planning issues, sexual rights, teenage pregnancy. So at GRPA, persons are able to come in, access information, access services. We offer counseling services as well for gender-based violence, relationship counseling. You just want to talk to somebody, you can come into GRPA. Or, you're not sure, you're getting married, you're planning a family, come into GRPA, the clinic, or you can come upstairs and talk to us, get counsel, get your services, get informed, and come in and just, it's somebody's always available to talk to you. Or call us if you're not comfortable coming in, or you just want to find out something. Call us on 225-0738, and somebody's there to talk to you. So I would like to say thank you very much to Ms. Britton and Mr. Simpson. You've been really delightful guests, and I'm sure, there's a lot of our viewers at home have a lot to think about and to digest tonight. So to you, our viewers, I'd like to say this is Renuka Anandjit on behalf of the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association. Thank you very much for tuning in, and have a good night.
Planning is essential to healthy life and a healthy nation. The Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association provides high-quality and low-cost healthcare for everyone with family planning counseling, contraceptives, pregnancy testing, fertility and prenatal treatment. At GRPA, there's confidential HIV and STI counseling, testing and treatment, screening for prostate and cervical cancer. GRPA, your #1 sexual and reproductive healthcare provider. 7 Tequamina Street, telephone 225-3286 or 225-0739.